What if one of rock's most respected legends secretly couldn't stand some of the biggest bands in music history? Eric Clapton isn't just a guitar icon. He's a purist, a blues disciple, and a man who's never been afraid to speak his mind. While most artists played it safe, Clapton dropped quiet bombs about bands that millions worship. And what he said about these three bands might just change how you see them forever. When it comes to legendary bands, few names hit harder than Led Zeppelin. With their thunderous riffs and wild stage presence, they redefined what rock could sound like. But for Eric Clapton, they weren't just loud, they were offensive. Not in a moral sense, but musically. According to Clapton, Zeppelin represented something he just couldn't get behind. The distortion of blues into something he believed had lost all soul. Clapton once said that Led Zeppelin was stealing from the blues, but doing it wrong. To him, they took sacred material, songs from Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, Robert Johnson, and turned them into a wall of sound that felt more like a spectacle than a tribute. And it wasn't just artistic disagreement. Clapton reportedly believed Zeppelin's rise marked the death of the kind of music he lived for. He thought they were burying subtlety beneath noise, trading groove for volume and heart for hype. Behind the scenes, there were whispers that Clapton felt personally irritated by the way Jimmy Page, Zepp's guitarist, was celebrated. Page, who once worked as a session musician during Clapton's early years, was now being called the greatest guitarist alive. That stung. Not because Clapton was jealous, but because he genuinely felt the music was being misrepresented, and the fans didn't even know it. Clapton never launched a public war, but his distaste bled through in interviews and quiet comments. And to this day, Zeppelin fans have no idea how much one of rock's gods couldn't stand what they stood for. But Zeppelin wasn't the only band Clapton quietly turned his back on. You'd think Eric Clapton and the Beatles would be natural allies. Both rose to power in the British rock scene. Both were worshipped by fans around the world. And both shaped the future of music forever. And while Clapton did collaborate with George Harrison, most famously playing that haunting solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, things behind the scenes weren't nearly as friendly as they seemed. Clapton respected Harrison deeply. The two had a long, complicated friendship, even tangled in a notorious love triangle over Pattie Boyd, George's wife who eventually left him for Clapton. But when it came to the Beatles as a band, Clapton kept his distance, quietly, carefully, but undeniably. He was never impressed by the group's psychedelic turn. While the world was falling in love with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and I Am the Walrus, Clapton found it all a bit indulgent. In later interviews, he hinted that the Beatles were more about style than soul during that phase. To him, it felt like experimentation for the sake of novelty, not music grounded in feeling or tradition. There was also the matter of band politics. Clapton hated the idea of creative power struggles, something the Beatles had plenty of as they spiraled toward their breakup. He was a soloist by nature, and watching four musical giants battle for dominance didn't sit right with him. It's no surprise he turned down multiple offers to join supergroups or permanent bands. Even the Beatles themselves were rumored to have considered him briefly. To the public, Clapton and the Beatles shared stages and smiles, but underneath he saw them as something he could never truly be part of. Not because he wasn't welcome, but because he didn't want to be. And the next band on Clapton's silent blacklist, it's one nobody saw coming. It's certainly the same fire the Absolos generation musics. Eric Clapton was quietly forming his own opinions. They weren't exactly glowing. Clapton and the Rolling Stones ran in the same circles, shared the same stages, and even played together on occasion. From the outside, it looked like mutual respect. But behind closed doors, there were signs that Clapton wasn't as impressed as people thought. In fact, he once hinted in an interview that the Stones borrowed too much swagger and too little depth, a comment that flew under the radar but said a lot about how he really felt. Mick Jagger's showmanship, the band's gritty energy, the blues-inspired riffs. It should have been a match made in heaven for someone like Clapton, but that was the problem. He didn't see them as real blues. He saw them as a performance of the blues, something stylized and diluted for mass appeal. For Clapton, who saw the blues as sacred, this was more than a musical difference. It was a betrayal of the genre's roots. There were also whispers of tension between Clapton and Jagger. Some say Clapton found Mick too theatrical, too focused on image and persona rather than music. Others say he disliked the band's commercial empire, which to Clapton represented the exact kind of industry machine he resented. And then there was the unspoken rivalry. Clapton had been hailed as God on guitar long before the Stones reached their peak. Yet while they exploded into global fame, he remained the tortured purist, watching as the bands he considered lesser were celebrated more loudly. He never said it outright, but he didn't have to, because Clapton's silence often said more than words ever could. And what fueled that silence ran even deeper than band politics. To truly understand why Eric Clapton turned his back on bands the world adored, you have to look past the fame, the guitars, and even the music. Because beneath it all, Clapton wasn't just an artist. He was a purist, a gatekeeper of a sound he believed was slipping away, the blues. Clapton didn't just like the blues, he lived it. From Robert Johnson to Muddy Waters, he studied the genre's pain, rhythm, and soul, with almost religious devotion. To him, blues wasn't entertainment, it was truth. So when he watched bands like Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones borrow from that tradition, but twist it into something louder, flashier, and more commercial, he didn't see innovation. He saw erosion. This is why his critiques hit different. He wasn't lashing out of jealousy or ego. He was defending what he saw as the last sacred thing in music. In interviews, he often spoke of how commercial success can poison artistry, how fame shifts focus from emotion to image. He'd seen it happen. He refused to be part of it. Even his own fans didn't escape this mindset. Clapton was known to walk off stage mid-performance if the crowd wasn't listening. Not clapping, not screaming, listening. That's how serious he was about musical integrity. And when he saw other bands playing to sold-out stadiums with watered-down riffs and exaggerated showmanship, it confirmed what he feared. The blues was being replaced by spectacle. So no, Clapton's criticisms weren't about the artists themselves. They were about the message, the sound, the soul. He believed certain bands weren't just misrepresenting the blues. They were burying it beneath noise and glitter. And as the music world celebrated louder and louder, Clapton stood alone in the quiet, guarding the roots of it all. But here's the twist most people miss. Eric Clapton didn't hate greatness. In fact, he admired it deeply. He just didn't believe that fame and genius always came together. And while he had strong opinions about bands like Zeppelin, the Beatles, and the Stones, it wasn't black and white. There were moments of praise hidden between the lines, but only if you listened closely. Clapton never denied the talent of Jimmy Page or George Harrison. He didn't question their skill, he questioned their direction. That's a massive difference. To Clapton, it wasn't how well you played the guitar, it was why you picked it up in the first place. Was it to chase the sound of heartbreak or to chase applause? And sometimes his respect went in completely unexpected directions. He once called Prince the best guitarist in the world, a shocking statement, considering how far Prince's style veered from traditional blues, but that was the point. Clapton didn't need artists to sound like him. He needed them to mean it, to be real. And when someone like Prince came along, blending flash with sincerity, soul with innovation, Clapton saw authenticity. That's what mattered. The same can't be said for everyone. When he felt an artist was performing a version of emotion instead of feeling it, that's when the wall went up. Clapton didn't start fights, but he made it clear when something didn't ring true. His quiet critiques weren't about tearing others down. They were about preserving something fragile, something he believed was slipping away with every screaming crowd and every overproduced hit. So before we paint Clapton as bitter or jealous, maybe we should ask a different question. Was he the only one brave enough to say the music was losing its soul? Eric Clapton never needed to shout to make a statement. His quiet disapproval of some of the world's most beloved bands wasn't about rivalry, it was about values. He believed in music that came from pain, truth, and soul. And when he felt that was being lost to fame, flash, or spectacle, he stepped back, not with hate, but with heartbreak. While fans saw legends, Clapton saw lines being crossed. Not everyone agreed with him, but maybe that's what made his stance so powerful. He didn't chase popularity, he chased purity. So, the next time you hear a Zeppelin riff, a Beatles classic, or a Rolling Stones anthem, ask yourself, was Clapton wrong, or was he one of the only ones who actually saw what was happening?